The screech of tires across concrete at 6:47 a.m. shattered Jake Morrison's peaceful Saturday morning like a sledgehammer through glass. He bolted upright in bed, his coffee-stained Eagles t-shirt clinging to his chest as the familiar sound of destruction echoed from his front yard. Again? Not again, he muttered, stumbling to the window and peering through the blinds. Sure enough, there it was, Margaret Pemberton's pristine white Lexus SUV, complete with its blasted vanity plate, sitting smugly atop what remained of his carefully cultivated boxwood hedge. The same hedge he replanted 3 times in the past 2 months. Jake had moved to Willowbrook Estates 18 months ago, drawn by the promise of suburban tranquility and the kind of neighborhood where kids still rode bikes and neighbors waved from their porches. What the realtor hadn't mentioned was Margaret Pemberton, the self-appointed queen of the Homeowners Association, and his next-door neighbor, who seemed to view property lines as mere suggestions. The first incident had been in March. Jake had been working late when he heard the now familiar crunch of his hedge being flattened. The next morning, he found tire tracks cutting straight through his landscaping, leading directly to Margaret's driveway. When he politely knocked on her door, she answered wearing a pink velour tracksuit and an expression that could curdle milk. "Oh, that little bump in your yard," she'd said, waving a manicured hand dismissively. "Honey, I've been using that shortcut for 15 years, long before you moved in. Besides, it's barely noticeable." Barely noticeable. Jake had stared at the $300 worth of destroyed plantings and felt his eye twitch. "Mrs. Pemberton, that's my property. You can't just drive through my yard." "Actually," she replied, pulling out a thick binder with color-coded tabs. "According to the HOA Covenant Section 4.27, any landscaping that interferes with reasonable access can be considered a nuisance. And sweetie, your little hedge makes it very difficult for me to back out of my driveway safely." That had been the beginning of what Jake now referred to as the hedge wars. Each time he replanted, Margaret would find a new excuse to drive through it. Too dark to see at night. Emergency situation with her cat, Princess Whiskers. Late for her book club. The excuses were as creative as they were infuriating. The HOA board meetings became Jake's personal hell. Margaret would arrive armed with her binder, a thermos of sweet tea, and a smile that could fool saints. She'd present her case with the precision of a prosecutor, complete with printed photographs and highlighted regulations. Jake, meanwhile, would sit in the back row, watching his neighbors nod sympathetically at Margaret's tales of the difficult new resident who was making the neighborhood less welcoming. "We all need to be good neighbors," Margaret would coo, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Some people just don't understand how things work in an established community like ours." The worst part wasn't the destroyed landscaping or even the mounting replacement costs. It was the smug wave Margaret would give him each morning as she backed out of her driveway, the same route that took her directly over his hedge. She'd even started honking her horn as if announcing her daily destruction to the entire neighborhood. Now, staring at the latest casualty in their ongoing war, Jake felt something snap inside him. He tried reasoning. He tried the HOA. He even tried building a small decorative fence, which Margaret had complained about as an eyesore, until he was forced to remove it. But as he watched Margaret emerge from her SUV, adjusting her pearls and checking her reflection in the side mirror without so much as a glance at the destruction beneath her tires, Jake realized that sometimes the only way to stop a Karen is to give her exactly what she's asking for. He just needed to be smarter about it. Jake spent the next 3 hours doing what Margaret had clearly never bothered to do, actually reading the HOA covenants. All 247 pages of them. Armed with coffee strong enough to strip paint and a growing sense of vindication, he discovered something beautiful. Margaret had been breaking more rules than a teenager with a fake ID. The revelation came on page 127, subsection 12.43. No vehicle shall traverse or park upon landscaped areas, including, but not limited to grass, planted beds, or decorative borders, except in cases of emergency as defined in section 3.81. Emergency situations, according to Section 3.81, included fire, medical crisis, or imminent threat to life or property. Princess Whiskers having a hairball apparently didn't qualify. But that was just the beginning. Jake's legal background. He'd worked as a paralegal before switching to software development, kicked into high gear. He started documenting everything with the methodical precision of a forensic investigator. Photos with timestamps, measurements of tire tracks. Even a small security camera disguised as a garden ornament, positioned to capture Margaret's daily destruction in glorious HD. The camera had been his girlfriend Sarah's idea during their Sunday brunch the week before. "You need evidence," she'd said, stabbing her eggs Benedict with more force than necessary. "People like Margaret count on everyone being too polite to call them out. Document everything and then use her own weapon against her, the HOA rules." Sarah worked as a property manager and had dealt with her share of entitled residents. She understood the type. These people are bullies, Jake. They rely on others backing down. But the moment you fight back with their own playbook, they crumble. The camera captured Margaret's routine with clockwork precision. Every morning at 7:15, she'd reverse out of her garage, her Lexus turning toward Jake's hedge with the inevitability of a heat-seeking missile. She paused for just a moment, not to reconsider her route, but to check her lipstick in the rearview mirror. Then came the crunch. What the camera also captured was something Jake hadn't noticed before. Margaret would actually speed up as she hit the hedge. This wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. She was enjoying it. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning when Jake watched Margaret reverse over his newly planted rosebush, a memorial plant for his grandmother who passed 6 months earlier. The thorny branches scraped against her SUV's undercarriage as she drove through, and Jake could swear he saw her smile in the driver's seat. That afternoon, Jake filed his first formal HOA complaint. Not about the hedge, that would be expected. Instead, he filed 3 separate violations. Unauthorized vehicle operation on landscaped property, creating unsafe driving conditions in residential areas, and destruction of personal property. Each complaint was meticulously documented with photos, timestamps, and relevant covenant citations. Margaret's response came within 24 hours, delivered by hand in a cream-colored envelope with her monogrammed letterhead. "Dear Mr. Morrison," it began in her precise, teacher-like handwriting, "I find your recent complaints to be frivolous and vindictive. As a founding member of this community and current HOA treasurer, I assure you that your petty grievances will be addressed with the seriousness they deserve. Perhaps if you spent less time causing drama and more time maintaining proper landscaping that doesn't interfere with established traffic patterns, we wouldn't have these issues. I suggest you reconsider your approach before this matter escalates further. Sincerely, Margaret E. Pemberton, HOA treasurer." Jake read the letter twice, his anger crystallizing into something colder and more focused. Margaret had just made 2 critical mistakes. First, she put her threats in writing. Second, she reminded him of something important: she was the HOA treasurer. That evening, Jake made a call to his friend Mike, who worked as an auditor for the county. "Hey Mike, hypothetical question. If someone wanted to request financial records from a homeowners association, how would they go about that?" Mike's laugh was knowing. "Buddy, HOA financial records are supposed to be available to any member upon request. Most people just never ask." "You thinking what I think you're thinking?" "Maybe. What would you look for if you were, hypothetically, auditing an HOA's books?" "Unauthorized expenses, personal use of association funds, kickbacks from contractors. The usual stuff. Why you think your HOA treasurer might have her hands in the cookie jar?" Jake stared at Margaret's house through his kitchen window, watching her water her immaculate flower beds with the same precision she used to destroy his. "Let's just say I'm starting to wonder how someone affords a new Lexus on a retired teacher's pension." "Well, if you do request those records and find anything interesting, you know who to call. I love a good financial mystery, especially when it involves taking down entitled board members." As Jake hung up the phone, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months: hope. Margaret thought she held all the cards, but she'd been playing a game she didn't fully understand. Jake was about to teach her that sometimes the quiet neighbor with the destroyed hedge knows more about rules and regulations than the person who's been hiding behind them. The real game was just beginning. Jake's formal request for HOA financial records landed on Margaret's desk like a hand grenade in a tea party. He'd submitted it through proper channels, citing Section 18.2 of the covenants, which guarantee any member access to association financial documents within 10 business days. The beauty of it was that Margaret couldn't refuse without violating the very rules she loved to weaponize. Her response came on day 9, just under the deadline. The records arrived in a cardboard box that looked like it had been hastily assembled, with papers stuffed inside with all the organization of a hurricane aftermath. Clearly, Margaret hoped the sheer volume would discourage him from digging deeper. She underestimated Jake's determination and his friendship with Mike. "Holy hell," Mike whistled as they spread the documents across Jake's dining room table that Saturday morning. "Look at this disaster. Either your treasurer is completely incompetent or she's hiding something big." What they found made Jake's destroyed hedge seem like a parking ticket in comparison. Over the past 3 years, Margaret had authorized over $47,000 in landscape maintenance payments to Pemberton Property Services, a company that, according to Mike's quick internet search, was owned by Margaret's son, Derek. "Check this out," Mike said, pointing to a series of invoices. "She's been paying her son's company $3,800 a month for general landscaping services. But look at your neighborhood. Does this look like $45,000 worth of professional landscaping to you?" Jake looked out his window at the standard subdivision lawns and basic flower beds. "My neighbor Bob does most of the common area maintenance himself with a riding mower he bought at Sears." But the landscaping scam was just the appetizer. Mike found payment authorizations for a $12,000 emergency roof repair on the community clubhouse, which didn't have a roof since it was just a gazebo. There were monthly payments to something called Pemberton Security Consulting for $800, despite the neighborhood having no security service. Most damning of all were the credit card statements showing charges at high-end restaurants, a spa in Charleston, and what appeared to be a weekend trip to Myrtle Beach, all marked as HOA business expenses. "Jake, your HOA treasurer, has been running a personal ATM machine," Mike said, his auditor instincts fully engaged. "This isn't just a few questionable expenses. This is systematic embezzlement. We're looking at potentially $80,000 or more over 3 years." The irony was delicious. Margaret, who'd spent months lecturing Jake about community standards and following the rules, had been stealing from her neighbors with the audacity of a Vegas con artist. But Jake's satisfaction was interrupted by a knock at his front door. Through the peephole, he saw Margaret herself, dressed in her Sunday best despite it being Saturday, holding what looked like another formal letter. "Mr. Morrison," she said when he opened the door, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "I understand you've been making inquiries about association business that frankly don't concern you." "Actually, as a paying member of this HOA, they concern me quite a bit," Jake replied, keeping his voice level, "especially when I see how my dues are being spent." Margaret's composure cracked slightly. "I don't know what you think you found, but I've been managing this association's finances for 5 years without a single complaint. Perhaps if you spent less time playing detective and more time being a productive community member, we wouldn't have these issues." "You mean like the $12,000 for roof repairs on a gazebo that doesn't have a roof?" The color drained from Margaret's face so quickly Jake thought she might faint. She recovered with the skill of someone who talked her way out of trouble before, but her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her letter. "I don't know what you're implying, but any expenses were properly approved and documented according to board procedures. Were they approved by the full board or just by you as treasurer?" Margaret's jaw tightened. "As treasurer, I have discretionary authority for maintenance expenses under $5,000. Anything larger requires board approval, which was obtained." "Great. I'd love to see those board meeting minutes where they approve payments to your son's company." This time, Margaret's mask slipped completely. "How dare you? My son runs a legitimate business, and if the association chose to hire him, it's because he provides quality service at competitive rates. $3,800 a month for mowing grass seems pretty expensive to me." Margaret thrust the letter at him with shaking hands. "This is a formal cease and desist notice. If you continue spreading malicious rumors and harassing board members, the association will take legal action against you for defamation and breach of covenant." Jake took the letter without opening it. "Margaret, I haven't spread any rumors. I've simply requested records that I'm entitled to see. But since you brought up legal action, you should know that financial fraud and embezzlement are serious crimes, the kind that the state attorney general's office investigates." The threat hit Margaret like a physical blow. She stepped backward, her composure completely shattered. You can. There's no fraud. Everything was legitimate. I've served this community faithfully for years, and I won't have some outsider destroy my reputation with baseless accusations. Then you won't mind if I share these records with the other homeowners, right? Full transparency should clear everything up." Margaret's face went from pale to red to purple in the span of seconds. "If you do that, I'll make your life hell. You think the hedge was bad? You have no idea what I can do to someone who crosses me." The threat was a mistake. Jake's phone had been recording the entire conversation. "Is that a threat, Margaret?" She realized her error immediately. "I know, I just meant, look, maybe we can work something out. Neighbors should be able to resolve their differences without involving outside parties." "You're right," Jake said, closing the door. "We should have resolved the hedge issue months ago. But some people only understand consequences." Through the window, Jake watched Margaret stumble back to her house, her perfect composure finally cracked. Mike appeared at his shoulder, grinning like a shark who'd smelled blood. "Did she just threaten you while you were recording her?" "She sure did. And now she knows we found the money trail." "So what's the plan?" Jake looked at Margaret's house, then at the fresh tire tracks through his hedge from that morning's drive-by destruction. "Tomorrow is the monthly HOA meeting. I think it's time the neighbors learned where their money has been going. And Margaret's about to discover that when you play with fire long enough, eventually you get burned." The Willowbrook Estates Community Center had never seen a crowd like this. Word had spread through the neighborhood with the efficiency of a wildfire. Jake had quietly mentioned to a few neighbors that tomorrow's HOA meeting would be particularly interesting. By 7 p.m., every folding chair was occupied, with latecomers standing along the walls like spectators at a championship fight. Margaret arrived fashionably late, as always wearing her power suit and carrying her infamous binder. But something was different. Her usual confident stride had been replaced by something more cautious, and Jake noticed she avoided eye contact with most of the residents. She clearly hoped for a typical meeting with the usual handful of attendees, not this packed house. "Well," she said, forcing her trademark smile as she took her place at the front table, "what a wonderful turnout tonight. It's so nice to see our community taking an active interest in association business." Board President Tom Henderson, a retired postal worker who'd always been intimidated by Margaret's forceful personality, shuffled his papers nervously. "Let's start with the treasurer's report, shall we, Margaret?" "Of course." Margaret opened her binder with practiced efficiency. "I'm pleased to report that our association remains in excellent financial health. Our current balance is $23,847 and all bills are current. We've had some necessary maintenance expenses this quarter, but nothing outside normal parameters." Jake stood up from his seat in the third row. "I'd like to ask some questions about those maintenance expenses, if that's okay." Margaret's smile faltered slightly. "Certainly. Though I should mention that detailed financial discussions are typically handled in executive session." "Actually," Jake interrupted politely, "according to the bylaws, all financial matters should be transparent to the membership. I've been reviewing our expenses and I have some concerns." A murmur rippled through the crowd. This was already more excitement than most of these meetings had seen in years. "What kind of concerns?" asked Mrs. Chen from the front row. Jake pulled out a manila folder thick with documents. "Well, for starters, we've been paying $3,800 per month to Pemberton Property Services for landscaping. Over 3 years, that's $136,800. Can anyone here tell me what $136,800 worth of landscaping looks like?" The room fell silent as neighbors looked around at their decidedly ordinary yards. Bob Martinez, who actually did most of the common area maintenance, raised his hand tentatively. "I've been mowing the entrance area and the gazebo grounds for free for 2 years. What exactly is Pemberton Property Services doing?" Margaret's face had gone pale. "Mr. Morrison, this is highly inappropriate. If you got concerns about approved expenses, you should submit them through proper channels." "I did submit them through proper channels. That's how I discovered that Pemberton Property Services is owned by your son, Derek." Jake's voice carried clearly through the now silent room, the same son who, according to public records, has been living in Florida for the past 2 years. The murmur became a rumble. Margaret stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is a witch hunt. Mr. Morrison has been harassing me for months over a simple property dispute, and now he's making wild accusations." "Are they accusations, though?" Jake opened his folder and pulled out a stack of photographs. "Because I also found it interesting that we paid $12,000 for emergency roof repairs on our community gazebo." He held up a photo of the open-air structure. "As you can see, our gazebo doesn't actually have a roof to repair." The rumble became genuine outrage. Voices rose throughout the room as neighbors began putting together the implications. Margaret's perfect reputation was crumbling in real time, and Jake wasn't finished. "There's also $9,600 paid to Pemberton Security Consulting over the past year. Can anyone tell me what security services we've been receiving?" "None," called out Janet Williams from the back. "My house was broken into 6 months ago, and when I asked about neighborhood security, Margaret told me we couldn't afford it." Margaret was now visibly shaking. "These are taken out of context. All expenses were properly documented and approved. Mr. Morrison is deliberately misrepresenting routine business." "Then let's talk about routine business." Jake pulled out another set of documents, like the $800 monthly payments to Pemberton Security Consulting that correspond exactly with charges at the Palmetto Bay Resort and Spa, or the emergency board meeting expenses that seemed to coincide with weekend trips to Charleston. The room erupted. Neighbors were standing now, voices overlapping in anger and disbelief. Tom Henderson was banging his gavel frantically, but no one was paying attention to parliamentary procedure anymore. "You've been stealing from us," shouted Bob Martinez. "While my wife and I have been struggling to pay these constantly increasing dues, you've been taking vacations on our money." Margaret's composure finally shattered completely. "You don't understand. 3 months later, Jake stood in his front yard admiring his newly restored hedge. The boxwood had finally grown back thick and green, creating the perfect border he'd originally envisioned. More importantly, it had remained undisturbed for 93 consecutive days, not that he was counting. Margaret's house next door sat empty, a for sale sign swaying in the autumn breeze. After her arrest, the full scope of her crimes had come to light during the investigation. The final tally was staggering: $127,000 embezzled over 5 years through fake invoices, fraudulent expenses, and outright theft. She'd been sentenced to 3 years in prison in order to pay full restitution to the HOA, though the money was long gone, spent on luxury vacations, spa treatments, and maintaining the lifestyle that had made her feel superior to her neighbors. The white Lexus with the blessed vanity plate had been repossessed 2 weeks after her arrest. Jake's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Dinner at 7? I'm bringing champagne to celebrate your Hedge's 3-month anniversary. He grinned, remembering how the story had become neighborhood legend. The tale of Jake Morrison and the HOA Karen had spread beyond Willowbrook Estates, shared on social media and retold at dinner parties across the city. Some versions were more dramatic than others. He particularly enjoyed the one where Margaret had allegedly tried to escape in her Lexus but crashed into his Hedge one final time, but the core message remained the same. Sometimes the quiet ones fight back hardest. The aftermath had been surprisingly positive for the community. With Margaret gone, the HOA had elected a new board of actually reasonable people. Bob Martins became the new treasurer and had immediately implemented transparent financial reporting and regular audits. The association's recovered funds, combined with the insurance payout from Margaret's crimes, had been used to install actual security lighting, repair the community gazebo, and give an actual roof, and even create a small playground that the neighborhood kids had been requesting for years. Jake's reputation had transformed from difficult new resident to neighborhood hero. Mrs. Chen regularly brought in homemade cookies. Bob had taught him how to properly maintain his hedge and had even helped him expand it into a full garden border. The irony was perfect. Margaret's years of destruction had ultimately led to Jake creating the most beautiful landscaping in the entire subdivision. But the sweetest justice had come just last week. Jake had been checking his mail when a familiar white car pulled up to the curb. For a moment, his heart rate spiked, but it wasn't Margaret. A young woman got out, looking tired and embarrassed. "Are you Jake Morrison?" she asked hesitantly. "Yes, I'm Derek Pebron. Margaret's. My mother asked me to come by." She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "She wanted me to apologize for what happened, and to give you this." She handed him an envelope containing a handwritten letter and a cashier's check for $3,200. "Mom insisted I tell you that the check covers the cost of all the landscaping she destroyed, plus interest." The letter, while she wrote it herself. Jake opened the letter carefully. Margaret's precise handwriting covered 2 pages, but the core message was surprisingly straightforward. She was sorry she had no excuse for her behavior, and she hoped he could forgive her someday. It wasn't the non-apology he might have expected. Prison, it seemed, had given Margaret time to reflect on her actions. "How was she doing?" Jake had asked. "Better, actually. Prison is, well, it's prison. But she's teaching GED classes to other inmates, and she says it's the first time in years she feels like she's actually helping people instead of just controlling them." Derek paused. "She also wanted me to tell you that your hedge looks beautiful. She can see it from the photos I sent her." The conversation had been awkward, but oddly healing. Jake had never wanted to destroy Margaret's life. He just wanted her to stop destroying his hedge. Sometimes, though, justice requires consequences, and Margaret had finally faced hers. Now, as he watered his thriving garden, Jake reflected on the strange journey that had started with his simple property dispute. He'd learned that standing up to bullies wasn't just about fighting back, it was about being smarter, more patient, and more thorough than they expected. Margaret had underestimated him because he was quiet and polite, assuming that meant he was weak. She discovered too late that quiet people often observe more, plan better, and strike more precisely than those who make the most noise. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Mike. "Hey, remember that audit training course I mentioned? The county is looking for volunteers to help investigate HOA fraud. Interested?" Jake looked at his beautiful, undisturbed hedge, thought about all the other neighborhoods with their own Margaret Pembertons, and smiled. "Absolutely," he typed back. "I seem to have developed a talent for this kind of thing." As the sun set over Willowbrook Estates, Jake Morrison stood in his perfectly landscaped yard, surrounded by healthy plants that no one would ever drive over again. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destruction. It's about building something beautiful and protecting it so well that the bullies of the world finally learn they can't tear down what matters to good people. And sometimes, just sometimes, karma doesn't just come around. Sometimes it gets arrested, convicted, and sentenced to 3 years of thinking about what it did wrong. The hedge had won after all. The end.